Right, here we are, another amazing week of AI. And today I want to talk about Gemini 2.0 wins. I mean, who saw that coming? Well, actually, kind of did. I mean, look, there is a lot happening in the world of AI, and there's probably a dozen other things that I could be talking about today. But I picked on Gemini because I really think there's not enough attention being given to what Google is doing right now. I mean, let's just be honest, okay? I mean, I'm guilty of it too. I talked about OpenAI's latest announcement the last time around, and we have to give credit where credit is due. I mean, Google is sort of the progenitor of the space to begin with. But this 2.0 release is a big leap. Now, to be clear, they haven't released it in every possible way that they can. There's still some things that they've held back, but they have released a ton. And there's actually a lot to talk about here. So I'm going to move through talking about Gemini 2.0 and the various elements of what they have released. But before I jump into Gemini 2.0, we need to go back a little bit and see where we've been because there's some important developments along the way. You know, it is kind of fun to look back a little bit and think about where we have come. And honestly, I started AI Mistakes in the channel really not that long ago. We're coming up on the first 2 years. In fact, I got the domain renewal for AI Mistakes just a couple of days ago. And the .ai domain that I'm still building out and developing is another one of those. But even at the 2-year mark, just to look back at where we have been over the last 2 years, there have been some pretty incredible leaps. And I got to be honest, right? 1.5 was pretty great, but 2.0 is really mind blowing. And there's a couple of different reasons why I say that. But let's take a look at where we were this time last year in February of 2024. My great AI tracker, Alan, he puts out these great things on lifearchitect.ai. And so I love to go and pick him up because he's got some really interesting ways of looking at the different levels of intelligence and where we are and where we've been. I think this is really an interesting comparison to make as well because he's very much focused on thinking about where we are from a human intelligence standpoint and where we are from an artificial intelligence standpoint. These are some important elements for us to consider because we want to make that comparison so we can understand what is the level of development? How far have we come? And what is the level of information that they are consuming and leveraging in the intelligence that they have? One of the interesting tidbits that's on this slide that I think is really interesting is the language count and the books read. When we think about the sheer volume of information that these AI models are digesting and taking advantage of, the sheer quantity is really quite overwhelming. And to think about any system being able to work across 200 languages, I think it's really inconceivable. And as I was doing my research for the program today, I was also looking at some of the other programs that we're going to talk about during the live broadcast, really showing an entirely new experience around language, being in a different place, um, and being able to speak with them through the power of translation on a device. It's a pretty incredible and powerful thing. So there's a lot that has already happened. I mean, this was Gemini 1 and Gemini 1.5. And I candidly, I don't know anyone that I can think of off the top of my head that said, wow, Gemini 1.5 is really the groundbreaking best model ever. Because the truth is, Google has been behind in terms of that cutting edge capability. They're not getting the same level of attention that OpenAI has been. And I've paid attention a lot to OpenAI because in many ways they showed us it was possible. And then, my personal preference has been for the last, I don't know, 18 months or so, Claude. I really like the way that Claude writes. I like the way that it generates the language. I like it more that than what I've seen with OpenAI. There's not really anything that I've felt compelled to be really tied to Gemini, other than the fact that it's part of the Google ecosystem, and I use it to parse my email. So it is a helper to me in a number of different ways, and I do pay for it. It is a valuable resource to me. It lets me scale the amount of work that I can do, but it hasn't been majorly talked about. And the thing is, Google has been the first to a number of areas. And what I honestly didn't realize is that Google was actually the first real deep research. Yeah, I made a mistake. I really did. This was an AI mistake of mine. Uh, Google released deep research in December, and I completely missed it. Didn't see it. Didn't know that they had it. Didn't know it was a thing. And when I did the video 2 weeks ago, I talked about deep research, and I talked about the release of OpenAI and their deep research, and everything we've seen with the other model, DeepSeek, and how it was doing the chain of thought in print. But the reality is, deep research really got there first. And I didn't notice it until I was doing my research today. So mea culpa, I missed it. There it is. Look, 1.5 Pro with deep research, and I don't know how I missed it, but I didn't come across it. I really love these deep research ideas, and we continue to add to them. Perplexity has one, and it seems like everybody is going that route of adding the deep research capability. It's now an open thing. It seems to be something that people really enjoy and like, and I think it's a valuable feature set. So that is definitely something to keep in mind. And look, not everybody has the subscription to Google's properties, and I get that, but I did want to give them clear credit for what they have done. So with that fix done, let's move on and talk about exactly what's in Gemini 2, because I think there's some really important things here that you don't want to miss. And I haven't seen anybody talking about this. Now, it's not as if I'm on YouTube every night watching everybody else's AI videos, because I'm not. I'm thinking about this on my own. So if I'm retrenching something that somebody else covered, I haven't seen it. So I don't know. But I have been thinking deeply about this, and I do think there is something important here that you don't want to miss. And when I think about the kind of things that are in this release, and I'm going to see if I can blow this up a little bit here, because it is a little bit on the small side. When we're talking about what they have released, there's several models. So we have Gemini 2.0 Flash, the Flash Lite preview, Gemini 2.0 Pro, Gemini 2.0 Flash Thinking Experimental, and Gemini 2.0 Pro Experimental. Now, there's a lot here. So let's unpack this just a little bit, because there are some unique features that you need to be aware of. And they each kind of have their own special sauce and value. And I think that's one of the things that's going to be a big takeaway from our conversation tonight is what exactly is important here and what do you need to pay attention to. So the first I want to point to is that 2.0 Flash is generally available, but you have to use it in a couple of very specific ways. The best way is going to actually be Google AI Studio or Vertex AI, because you can directly consume it. And the number one unique feature here is 2 million token context. That is a huge context window. I understand from looking at people's results that it's not perfect. There has been some challenge around the context, but 2 million is just an outrageous number, quite honestly. Multimodal is an important thing. There's lots of control over the text to speech and the agentic capabilities, which we're also going to come back to this a little bit later as well. It is very much focused toward those use cases. But honestly, I really think the most important element here is the 30% cheaper for large context. That is not to be understated, because when you are applying this to an agentic set of use cases, there's a lot more calls that have to be made. And so that cost differential is really going to mean a lot to the people that are using this capability. So we're definitely going to come back and talk more about Gemini 2.0 Flash later in the discussion. I'll show you exactly how to use this from an agentic standpoint. We're going to keep going on how we can use this to our advantage and put it to work. And Gemini 2.0 Flash really is the game changer in more than one way, because what you need to understand is what has been happening in the background. Okay. We have Gemini 2.0 Flash that has been released, and the major news, in fact, it's such big news, I made it the title of the video. It is the top agent on the leaderboard. Now, there is this project space on Hugging Face, Galileo AI agent leaderboard. They are trying to help drive the adoption and the evaluation of LLMs that are doing agentic work. And so they are rating these various models. And look at there, number one on the list, Gemini Flash. Gemini Flash 2.0 is right there first. And the real kicker here is look at the cost differential between Gemini 2.0 Flash and GPT 4.0, the other agentic and quite popular model for doing agent related tasks. That is a huge delta. And this is why it matters so much, because number one, it is getting a very, very high appraisal. The scores are the highest, and it is the cheapest. That, I think that's the real game changer here, is that Google delivered with Gemini 2.0 Flash a very high score from an impression standpoint across the people that are doing the evaluation, across the evaluation of the various systems, and low cost. Now, they are not the absolute cheapest. Oddly enough, the absolute cheapest also belongs to Google, which I think they should be very proud of. The fact that they're delivering this, and I think some of this has to do with their TPU architecture. They're not having to pay the NVIDIA tax right now, and that might have something to do with the rate that they are charging. The other notable things that you should observe here is that it is not simply an open AI and Google show, though the first 6 places are exclusive to either open AI or Google. I want to give some good credit here to Mistral. And while we're very much focused on talking about Google today, I do want to call out Mistral released their mobile app here recently, so you can actually go and interact directly with Mistral on the iPhone. That's the platform that I'm using. They're trying to make great strides. And there are some people that say that Europe has no good AI. Well, I beg to differ. Mistral is doing some very innovative things, and I think they deserve some kudos for continuing to make the list. I mean, they're beating DeepSeek, and that's the one that everybody's been talking about lately. So, wanted to call that out. Pretty critical distinction there, not to leave them behind. But the other couple of models that are on here, I think, are an important thing for us to talk about as well. I think the 3 things that I want you to leave from this slide with are, number one, Google has some new models that are experimental that they're giving us access to early. They're not saying these are complete, that they're fully baked, but they're giving us access to them anyway, because there are some specific capabilities that they have. So for Gemini 2.0 Pro, that is still classified as experimental, it is really built for that high coding experience. They are really trying to drive advanced code development and explainability. There's been a lot of talk about what Google has been doing with coding, and Gemini 2.0 Pro is a part of that discussion. They have increasingly used AI to do their internal development. So they are really putting their money into being able to accelerate what they can build. And I think that's a really great investment for Google. There was actually a bit of conversation on the All In podcast a week or two ago. They were talking about the investments that Google is making. And basically, what the analysis takeaway from the guys on the All In podcast was this effectively that this was the absolute best capital allocation that Google can make, investing in AI to accelerate their development across the board. So I think we're going to see more in that coding space. I would not be completely surprised if Google actually pulls ahead in the way that they're leveraging coding with the models. I think those two things go together really well. And they have so far really been firing on all cylinders lately. I think they've figured out some of their organizational things to start applying this in new ways. They're still not at the absolute cusp, but I think they have the velocity to pull ahead if they keep going, especially if there are some challenges that any of the other major organizations have across Microsoft, Anthropic, and OpenAI. You know, there's a lot of infrastructure at play here, and Google has a unique advantage with their TPUs. Now, there are a lot of companies that are developing unique hardware, and Microsoft was in the news a lot this week about that. We'll talk about that at another time because I'm really into quantum, but we're here to talk about AI. So, what about the other models? Gemini 2.0 Flash Thinking Experimental. That is the DeepSeek model. And if I go back to look at the video of the Google Deep Research, I actually kind of think that Google really showed a thinking model before everybody else did in greater detail. DeepSeek was the first one I picked up on, but again, my miss of the DeepSeek, the deep research capability, uh, when they released it in the beginning of December was a big miss on my part, and I think Google really deserves a lot more credit than they are getting. And then the last one here on the list is the Gemini 2 Pro experimental, where that's not released. That is entirely behind the scenes that we know they're working on further developing it. So there's definitely going to be more to come from what they are working on. So let's talk about the kinds of things that we can do with these models, because that is the other big news item here. And I've highlighted it. Look, OpenAI is doing some amazing things. DeepSeek has done some very cool things. But really, honestly, both of them totally irrelevant to multimodal. If you look at what O3 did, you know, it's not there, right? This is the best multimodal model that you can get access to, um, and anybody can get to it. That's the really amazing part. Like, they're not holding back. It does images, it does text, it does audio, it does voices and multiple accents and languages. And this is all completely accessible stuff. You can access and use the Gemini 2.0 models to do amazing things. And we're going to go into detail as we get into the discussion tonight. The agentic AI enablement. I mean, I would characterize the Gemini 2.0 release as the agentic AI release for Google, because not only does it have the capability to understand more than the text, but it's also able to work in multiple different modalities and in different functions. Now, they are definitely optimizing 2.0. Some of the models are optimized for coding, and some of them are optimized for complex instructions and doing other functions. But I think the key here is that the work they've done with Gemini 2 is really focused on enabling that agentic journey. And then we have the add-on of they are finding ways to inject this and leverage existing Google properties and capabilities, like integrating it with Google Search and Google Maps and making that journey easy, I think, is another key advantage here. And we're gonna do a little bit of a deep dive into that as we get into this discussion as well. But here is one thing that is definitely under the radar. I haven't seen this in any of the coverage that I've been reading. It's entirely possible that I missed it, but this is completely unique. And it is the ability to integrate streaming data into the generative AI outputs. So not only can you take in and consume audio and video, but also you're able to connect to those things in getting to the output. So I haven't had a chance to play with this yet, but this is very interesting. A multimodal live API. Not seen anything like that anywhere else. So that is definitely curious. And then as we're talking about where Flash is, this is the one that I really think that deserves the most attention from us right now, because Flash means it's very fast. And that is a big deal. It's also a low cost, and it's also performing really well. So, given the speed and the low cost and the capability, it is not to be missed. You got to get your hands on this and start working with it, because it's twice as fast as the previous version. They're also trying a new Flash Lite version. And this is particularly interesting because I think this Flash Lite model is definitely headed for Android devices. I think their plans are to further enable devices. I really do believe that 2025 is the year of on-device models. There's a lot of advantages to working in the cloud, but there's also a lot of challenges. And being able to run on a single device that you have with you, that you take with you everywhere, I think is where this is ultimately going to go. But what's amazing about even the flashlight is that even that runs at an equivalent of 1.5. So we're getting smaller and faster with the version upgrade. So that's a very important distinction as well. So let's keep going, because what is Google going to do with this? I definitely think there's going to be a product impact here. Um, they've already swapped models for Google search. I have not really paid attention to this very closely. You know, we had all of that trouble last year with the search. It was not a good story. I think they've learned their lesson. I think that, they made that AI mistake, and they understand how important it is to put the right model on that job. So they're upgrading that search capability quickly. You're also able to access the Gemini 2 model across Google Workspace. So if you're using Docs and Slides and Sheets and Meet, all of those products are benefiting from the improved capabilities of these models. Then, as I mentioned a moment ago, the Android devices, I really do think that I don't win. I honestly, I think mid-year. Um, I think the summer is going to be a fun time if you are looking at a device refresh coming up soon. I don't know. I think I might hold off. I'm not up on Google's refresh schedule, so I don't know when the next one is coming out. That's probably something that I need to look into after the fact. I did not think about that in preparing this, but I think we're going to see a big change there. Apple has tried it, and they messed it up. They did a terrible job. I'm not sure how they're going to recover from that, but I understand they're working on it. And Google's going to give their answer, and I think it's going to be a lot better. And then the one that the bullet point here that has to be captured is Google AI Studio and Vertex AI. Google is really working hard to make the AI capabilities accessible to developers, to organizations, and this is the way that they're doing it. And once again, they are really putting investments into making that possible, because we need to talk about pricing. So, couple of important details here that we need to talk about, and I'll just pull up the page, because we get on these eye charts, and it's kind of hard to see everything, and I like to zoom in a little bit. This is all priced per 1 million input tokens, and at 15 cents per million input tokens is really just unbelievable. And then it gets even cheaper with the batch API. They do have limits on what you can execute here. I mean, look, They're not just going to open the door to absolutely everything. But what's interesting here is that these prices are really low in terms of the API consumption and your use of them. What's interesting is now we have this modality based pricing where it is actually pricing per image, per text, per video, per audio. So they all have their own distinctive pricing. And the metering here, I think, is interesting because, look, we've got the input video, but the other announcement that just happened a few minutes ago is the VO2 model that has been announced by Google now is accessible by API. Now, Google has not done it as a first-class citizen, so I expect anytime now you'll see it available on their platform as well. But what's interesting is it's becoming more widely available, and we have to figure out how these things are going to be priced, right? I showed the OpenAI Sora, and they're doing it by tokens. You get a certain amount of tokens that you have to go and pay for. It's very expensive. I think we're going to see some continued disruption, honestly, by Google, what they're putting out there and making available. I mean, honestly, like, come on. This is like Bitcoin. Like, the price is such a small amount. Now, granted, it is per second, right? So, times 60 just to get to a minute. But I don't know, like that price astounds me, quite honestly. I am totally enthused by what they're putting here. But that's not even the whole deal, because now we have to talk about Google AI Studio. Here's what's interesting about Google AI Studio. In Google AI Studio, you can actually use the models inside of Google AI Studio, and it is completely free. Yes, you heard that right. It is completely free. If you go into Google AI Studio by going to aistudio.google.com, you actually have the opportunity to use the model completely free. Now, there are limitations and guardrails on how much you can run. So there's a rate throttle that is involved. But really, I mean, the fact that you're able to get in here and use this completely free is absolutely astounding to me. And we're going to take full advantage of it because there's some good things that we can do with this. They also have some really great tooling inside of the Google AI Studio. They link you directly to all the API documentation. You can turn on the stored prompts. So, I mean, this is from a project I did quite a few months ago, but I turned on the history, and it's able to bring it and keep it in there. We've got the prompt library. So if you're not sure where to start with prompts, I mean, there's some great stuff in here to get you started. They have starter apps. So again, they have an entire app that you can work with. So they are, again, connecting to their existing properties, and they are sort of overlaying with the maps. So you can just come in here and play around with it. Like, take me to a metropolitan area, show me a really interesting large city. It filled into the prompt, and it took us to looks like Pink City. I have no idea. Oh, Armenia. So that's a place I've not ever looked at. And it takes you right there, right? And you can manipulate it just like you would regular maps. So maybe there's some overlay or some search opportunity there. They give you the starting point for that, which I think is really, really fantastic. They also have this really great prompt building capability. So again, if you are stuck on, I don't know what to build, I don't know how to write prompts, this is a help to you. They give you what you need. I mean, this is like a developer paradise here. So if you are curious at all about developing AI tools or widgets, this is a really good place for you to take advantage of what's possible. And then they've got a great way to use it. But we'll come back to this because we're going to have to talk about getting the API key. This is a major, major deal. Not not to be missed. We'll come back to that. But the pricing of Gemini is just astounding. So here's some other things that we need to cover. I mentioned the TPU advantage that Google has. Oh, I see we got a question here before I move on. Let me go back to the pricing. We got Lynn Squos here. What will explain this input token business? That's a very good question. Let me jump back and talk to that, because that the token pricing is something that I could see where that would be really confusing. So when we talk about the 1 million input tokens, what we have to first understand is what a token is. And it's not precisely a word. A lot of people will use words as an analog for tokens, but that's not precisely correct. There's actually a paper out there that talks about it. And, you know, I can put in the links for the video today, another document that really explains, and there's a website that, well, actually you can type it in and it will parse out the tokens. So you get a better feel of what the tokens are. But basically that gets you enough tokens that you can take your average book that you and I would read, and it definitely is going to fit into that 1 million tokens. So imagine that it costs you 15 cents to put in every page of Lord of the Rings. Like, that's what we're talking about. 15 cents to be able to ask any questions about Lord of the Rings and have it answer you. Now, that's not covering the response, that's covering the input, because it is the input and the output that matters. But you see here, we've got the output text tokens as well. So you're going to pay 15 cents to load up Lord of the Rings, and then you're going to pay 60 cents if it prints out Lord of the Rings. Now, the truth is, almost always the amount of output is going to be less than the amount of input, particularly because one of the major use cases is retrieval augmented generation, where you're asking a question and you want a summary or a short answer. You want something succinct. You don't want it to write a novel. You don't want it to write a new book. Now, that is a use case for AI. So there is a time and a place for that. But I think realistically, in most scenarios, you're talking about the amount of input tokens. Now, this does not take into consideration caching of those input tokens, which is also possible. It is possible actually to load up those details and have it cache it so that you are not paying for that input token every single time. So, you can imagine if you want to consistently interrogate the Lord of the Rings, you could cache those tokens and then you don't have quite so much to pay because that's already loaded into the model. So there is a reduction in price for that as well. Okay, so let's get back to where I was talking about with the hardware release. What I noticed in the documents with the release of Gemini actually is that they talked about this hardware release. They are on their 6th generation GPU, which I think is really an interesting tidbit. I mean, you see how long this announcement is, and they're talking about all of the different projects that they're working on. And inside of this was this quote: Gemini 2.0 is built on custom hardware like Trillium. I find that language to be very interesting. Like Trillium. That means they're already working on version 7 and probably 8 and 9, if we're honest. But it is the 6th generation TPU, and this is the real Google special sauce. And so every bit of work that they have done on Gemini 2 is based from their TPU. And now, the other announcement here is that Trillium is generally available. So what does that mean? You now have the possibility to use those latest and greatest TPUs for your own AI project. Now, that may not be so important to this audience, but I do think that this is something to keep an eye on, because we have some very well-known and familiar languages like PyTorch and TensorFlow that are immediately compatible with TPUs. And there is some tremendous power that's behind the scenes here. They are building like crazy. Now, when Elon's group did his thing with Grok, and how many GPUs they deployed. Jensen got all excited and said, "Oh, nobody's deployed this as fast as they have." But I don't think we have a really good comparison for the TPU construct that Google is using or how fast they're rolling this out. I haven't seen any numbers, but you see here that a very well-known AI lab, AI 21, is using TPUs. And they are continuing to develop this. Google has some very sharp people working on hardware. So I do think there is some substantial runway ahead of Google for them to continue to turn this into a valuable service. I do think they have an early start on everybody else that is trying to build their own hardware to be like NVIDIA. NVIDIA's and apparently I've got something happening where my mic cut out there, so I apologize. What the key takeaway here is that your workload for AI might actually belong on Google Cloud. It might be the best place for that to belong. Um, you know, I think that's worth looking into. And especially as you get a chance to play with Gemini, you'll see what I'm talking about because they've done a really great job of optimizing for speed and for cost. And the hardware is 100% the reason why they are able to do that. Okay, now let's get back and talk about the agents because this is the agentic release. And everybody's talking about agents. I spend a lot of time in my day job talking about understanding, working with, experimenting, teaching, learning, everything there is about agents because it is the thing that everybody cares about. We all want to know how we can get rid of the work that we don't like doing. And I'm as guilty of it as anybody. And Google says straight up, this is our new AI model for the agentic era. So, with that in mind, what is Google doing with it that is agentic? Well, they have these three major projects. Now, these are all not public. You can actually sign up to participate in these with Google, and I dropped my Gmail address in there to them. You never know, right? I mean, you get a chance to get in early and test these things out. The forms were released in December, and because I'm late to the Gemini party here, I'm at the end of the list. But the forms are still open. So if this is something you're really interested in, go out there and sign up for the program. I signed up for both Astra and Mariner, and I'm particularly interested in Mariner. And what's interesting about Mariner is that they basically have taken and they've created a Chrome extension that allows them to inject Gemini into the window. So it is able to control the browser with this sort of side panel in Chrome. It gives you the typical interface to the large language model. You give it instructions, and it is able to control the companion window. And this is the video of the project management team actually demoing the product, looking at what's possible. This assignment here that they're working on actually is they're taking a couple of companies and they're trying to find contact information. If you're in the sales business, trying to understand who to contact is work that has to be done. And that information is out there for the sales folks to discover. And so you can now have the agent go and do that work for you. There's multiple different platforms that can do this. And because we do not have access to Project Mariner, it is still a hidden project. Well, how are we going to use Gemini? I have great news. And what's great about this browser input kind of paradigm that we're in the middle of, leveraging the browser experience is very much like where we have been in talking about the use of humanoid robots, because we all want to use this stuff. Why are humanoid robots a thing? The answer is very simple. Everything is designed for a human-sized interface. And so if you want the robot to be able to do the things that humans do, you make a robot that's shaped like a human. And so what do we do with using computers? I don't know what you guys are using every day, but kind of the first app I have to open on the computer is a browser, and many times it's the last app that it gets closed, because so much of our existence is based around browser use. And I hit upon it a little bit last time, but this browser use project is an open source capability. It is a project on GitHub. So browser use, and it's getting a lot of attention, tons of contributors. They're doing just tons and tons of building here that lets you use AI with your browser. And what's really great about this is that it takes a lot of the work, and it makes it easy. It's very consumable. It uses the image recognition to identify the various areas in the interface. For me, this is this is reminiscent of my CSS development days. I still have a web browser extension that I use in Google Chrome, called the developer toolbar, because as a website developer, I mean, being able to understand the layers, the presentation layers, and what you could move around in building a website, this very much reminds me of that in terms of how it is able to use it. And of course, the great thing here is that any website you can get to, you can use this capability with. So what I wanted to do is kind of take you through that. Now, last time we had a little bit of a challenge with Pinocchio and getting everything installed. So this time I got ahead of it. I'm not going to do it live, because it causes some disruption. And I really just wanted to show you what's great about this setup. What's cool here is that, again, with the use of Pinocchio, I didn't have to do any work. All I had to do was click my button to start up Pinocchio after I got it installed. And this is a prepackaged, ready to go Pinocchio option. So once I pull up Pinocchio, and I'll do it again just so you can see it. You go to the package offerings, and browser use web UI is right there. It is easy to access. I mean, this is just so simple. You just go to discover, and it's right here in the discovery, and it's at the top of the list, and you click a couple of buttons and it's there, and you're off and running. So super, super simple to get going. And then it has a web interface. So then all I have to do is click here to open the web UI. And once we get it going, we can configure everything right here in the browser session. So a couple of things that we'll just start right off with, because it's a web UI, I can zoom into it. That's very handy for YouTube. But you can enable and disable the vision model here. So you have the first place you can actually just turn it off and decide not to use it. I don't really see the value in that personally, but there you can take inputs and outputs from a page and do things with text without vision. But I really see the utility is in having the vision capability. But then there's the LLM configuration, and like every model option in the universe is already in here. So all you got to do is go in here and pick the one you want to use. If you installed Ollama after looking at the web UI for the models, right? You could just go in here and you tell it what model you want to use, and you're off and going. It's interfacing with Ollama, because I've got Ollama running in the background, so I can just pick it up. The one you want to look at here, though, is Google. And we have Google Gemini 2.0 Flash is right here, and we have a space to drop our API key. So check this out. If I go and I pick up Google AI Studio, and yes, you have to go get an ID, but come on, honestly, who doesn't have a Google account these days? Like, if you don't have a Google account now, you decided not to have one, and I get it. But look, just go create a new one, right? Even if you want to separate it, this is a no-brainer, because you just go in here and you click the Get API key, and it spits out a key, and then you can take that key and go somewhere with it and drop it in there. And in the interface, you drop in the API key and you're off and running. So I'm gonna do a little API magic here. Let me just hide the screen while I go and get another fresh API key by clicking the magical API button, and I've got to choose a project to drop this into. So we're going to do that. And I've got a couple of projects in Google. Actually, I am using Google Cloud for experimentation. They do have some good things. I like the way that their setup works. I'm also doing the same thing with OpenAI and Microsoft. So there's nothing special about that. I'm an equal opportunity exploiter in terms of the various cloud providers. And all I'm doing now is dropping this in. So I've got my API key, and I'm putting it in there. And once I've got that configured, I can go on to the next. I'm just going to leave this. We're going to use the browser that it opens, and I'm even going to use their demo. And we're going to run it. We're going to watch it. This could be fun. And while we're watching that, I see we got a couple more questions coming in. My big worry about browser agents, it will devastate the internet. That's a very good point. And this is actually opening Chromium. So it's in its own browser session to use the internet. And that is a very good point, because we do have a bot problem already. I mean, just imagine the proliferation of bots that we're going to have with this capability as everybody starts to use it and understands how to get their tasks done. And it's not a risk-free operation, right? I mean, you can imagine, well, I want to pay all my bills, right? You could automate that with this. But you also might consider the bad things that can happen. And there is some risk. This is not a risk-free endeavor. I can also tell you that using agents is not a mistake-free endeavor. And I think the concept of AI mistakes, I'm feeling pretty smart right about now, because look, it happens all the time. It's just not perfect, and it's non-deterministic. So how much can you rely on it? How much can you trust it to execute the same way? A lot of that's on the foundation model builders, making it reliable and being able to do the vision recognition and understand what it's seeing. But one of the interesting things you already see happening here is I asked it to go look for OpenAI and go to the first link and then find the API documentation. And it had a problem, but then it wound up searching for the API documentation. So the model understood what I wanted, and it acted differently. So this is definitely an area that is worthy of experimentation. I definitely think this is worth your time. If there is one model that you play with, it is Gemini 2.0 Flash. And with the Google AI Studio, you don't even have to enter a credit card. There are limitations. You can absolutely use it all up. So be aware, right, that could happen. But I definitely think this is worth your time, and you should go check it out. And with that, look, it's time to go make some AI mistakes with AI agents, because that's where we are. This tech is so nascent. It's so new. Don't let anybody tell you that they've perfected it, okay? None of this is foolproof. And The one thing I can also tell you is you probably don't want to set this loose on your regular computer. Like there is real risk here. So, if you have any ability to set up a virtual machine or put this on a separate computer just to keep things separated, I definitely think that is a good idea. There's going to be mistakes, but we're going to learn a lot from experimenting with this, and everybody's experimenting with it, right? Google's got their own project. OpenAI wants you to pay $200 to use theirs. Um, we've already seen Claude controlling a computer, so they've got an implementation of it. But this was just stupid simple to deploy and for me to start working with. And that's really thanks to Pinocchio. So, big, big promotion there for the work that Cocktail Peanut has done in building Pinocchio. Can't recommend that enough. We had the problem on the broadcast last time, and all I had to do was reboot the computer, and everything came up. I ran the job again, and it came up perfect. So it's a very robust system for being able to deploy and experiment with these things, and that really is where we are. And that's super exciting to me. This is an area that is filled with opportunity. I'm already thinking about all of the ways that I can use this in my own life to get some of those mundane things done that I just don't want to do. Even if it's just basic, right? Clicking some links and pulling some documents, that's really valuable. And you can use this inside of the browser. So if you can bring an application interface into the browser, that means you can use it with this. And if you want to do something on your local computer, again, going back to the capabilities that are in here for Pinocchio, there's a lot of tools that are available for building UIs, and invoking AI in unique ways and doing it on a local basis. So even if you're afraid of the whole vision thing or the cloud thing, we've got Lava, and like being able to generate and consume video is a choice. So there's a lot of options inside of Pinocchio, and I've got far too many projects in here because I've been able to experiment with a lot of things. And that's the other piece of this is just run some experiments, try things out, get your hands dirty. Look, you spend 5 minutes on it and you decide it's not a thing for you. Hey, it didn't cost you anything, and you learned what it takes. You may learn this isn't something I want to do. I just want to buy some software that's going to do it for me. That's an important thing to know. Know your limitations, or maybe you discover, gosh, this is really fun. I want to do this. Listen, there's a lot of companies that are looking for tech talent. You show up and say, I know how to build AI agents. Yeah. If you don't have a job right now and you show up talking about how you built an AI agent to do things for you, I think that's going to play in your favor. And that's part of what we're here to talk about, right? I want to help you get ahead. Let's go make some AI mistakes and make the world better. See you next time. Have a great week.